Hello, everyone. This is Rhys Tiller, Jeff Tiller, joined by the one and only Graham Barfield. Graham, how's it going?
Doing pretty well, guys. Thanks for having me on. Excited to talk some ball with you on this Tuesday night.
Yeah, I say this very facetiously. There's nothing to talk about in the world of football or sports right now, is there?
Nope, not at all. Nothing going on in college football. Nothing happening there. Not much of an NFL season coming forward. Nothing to talk about.
Yeah, I do wonder about I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but will we have a season? Will we not? All that jazz is I just want us to, don't take this wrong, but just shut up and play. Let's just get it going,
Yeah.
And because it's going to be interesting. All right. I was excited to see you and Scott Barrett start your own The Bears podcast, but join Fantasy Points with Greg Cosell, who we appreciate, and Kaplan and the crew. How did that all come about from your end?
Yeah, really exciting new project. This has been kind of it's just some backstory. Like, I originally worked for 3 years with Fantasy Guru. That was the original cast with John and Joe, Tom Browley, Ben Kukanis, who's our behind the scenes guy, who's the man. And then I took a job opportunity at the NFL, worked there for 2 great years. And it kind of just worked out where this opportunity came about. They were getting back together and wanted to start a new startup company and kind of give some people some new roles. And we brought on Scott, who's been awesome. I mean, he's seriously my favorite fantasy analyst in the business, which is really cool. Scott and I have been good friends for a long time, so it's been awesome to work with him. Officially for the first time, but like Greg is taking a bigger role. Adam Kaplan's taking a bigger role. So it kind of is like we're all bringing our different expertise to the table. It's been really great so far.
How about the Two Bars podcast? Who came up with that name?
Scott. I'm terrible at names. I'm terrible at like talking about myself or hyping myself up. Scott is the man for that. He came up with it. He originally wanted to call it the Scott Barrett Hour or the Barrett and the Barfer, which for whatever reason I didn't want to go with that. But no, he came up with the name. And Mike Wright from the Fantasy Footballers, he was like, if you guys could have just named it the Two Barfs. So I mean, look, I'm glad we went with the Two Bars, because like I said, I'm terrible with names. But that was all Scott.
It could have been Bar None the best, or
Bar None's pretty good.
And so that's why, it's just one of those names. Everybody wants that, to be able to hashtag it, right? Let's create a hashtag on Twitter. I also wanted to thank you, and we had the conversation with Scott when Rhys put out this book earlier in the off season. You guys were very kind, saying nice things on Twitter. He's 14, trying to do some analytics. Scott was giving him some pointers, feedback. And so, it's all about learning for the young lad. When you're 14, all I wanted to do was play outside. So I appreciate it.
No, I when you sent it to me, and I'm really not trying to pump you up, but like when you sent it to me, it seriously read like someone that was 5 or 6 years older and like had been spending years and years thinking about this. And I genuinely meant it when I said it. Like, this is your process for the way you were breaking down players, and your projections was better than some people do in the industry. So I can't wait for Rhys to come and take my job in a couple years or start his own company, because man, you got a bright career ahead of you if you want to keep this up.
Yeah, he does. But part of it is he's well read, right? He reads you, he reads Scott, he reads everybody he can. And, but I would say this as a euphemism for bigger part of life, is that if we're left on our own, all we do is decline. But us trying to understand thought processes and ways, mechanisms for thinking about different things, that's the best thing. All right. So Rhys, let's lead off with what question you got from Mr. Grant.
On your Twitter feed, you've mentioned being in Fantasy Writers Apex draft. How's that going for you?
Yeah, that's the toughest draft I do. One of the toughest drafts I do every year. So it's like, I'm not even close to the smartest person in there. Like Sean Siegel, who we actually just had on the Two Bars podcast today. I consider him like the best fantasy player I've ever played against. It's myself, him, Rich Rebar, who's the stat god, Evan Silva, John Paulson, who's like probably one of the best long-term projection guys ever, Mike Clay. It's just a terribly tough league. I was super lucky last year to win it. I got destroyed the first couple of years I was in it, made the playoffs my third year, and then won it last year. I picked fourth this year and got Kamara, Godwin, and Juju with my first 3 picks. I don't know. I actually really like my team, which probably spells disaster. Like every time I feel like I like my team in tough leagues, I end up just getting killed. But I actually do like how this one has turned out. I got a really nice value in Dak Prescott in the 7th round that I'm excited about. In industry leagues, a lot of the times quarterbacks typically like don't go off the board very quickly. And Dak Prescott in the 7th round in any league is a tremendous value. So it's really tough. It's a really tough league. It's been a tough draft so far, but I actually kind of like my team right now.
I'm in a league with Sean, and I'm in a kitchen sink Devi dynasty with Sean and Rich. I'm in several with Rich, and those guys are bright guys. And so I always enjoy playing against those guys. Just because I'm an old guy, I've been around for a long time. Yeah. And so I enjoy it, but it's also good to see you young guys doing so well. I mean, you know what I'm saying? This pie is huge. I want to see everybody be successful,
Yeah, it can. Everybody can be. That's the cool thing about the fantasy space is now I've been doing this full time for 7 years or so and doing it since 2013. And like just seeing it explode, the explosion and just how much more growth potential is here. Rhys, you may think you're fighting upstream, but I promise you, if you're doing good work, which you're doing, you're going to make a name for yourself.
I started writing in 2007, and it seems like so long ago. But anyway, what else you got for me?
In your 5th round, you took Hollywood Brown, wide receiver for the Ravens, over a possible running back 2 option like Chris Carson. Explain your thought process through that.
Sure. So just for background, in like 9 out of other 10 leagues, I would have never done that. But in this league where we have to start 3 wide receivers and there's a flex spot. So you start 2 running backs, 3 receivers, and a flex. By the time I got back on the clock in the 5th round, 26 wide receivers had already come off the board as opposed to 19 running backs. Typically see a lot more balance in most drafts, but in this draft, it's always extremely wide receiver heavy. And I already had 2 running backs. I took Kamara in the 1st round, like I said, and I got Melvin Gordon, who I'm pretty high on in the 4th round. I thought that was a pretty good value. Yep. So I came back and I got Hollywood, who I think is a league winner this year. Scott Barrett has done a lot of great work into Hollywood too. I just think he has the makings of like a massive sophomore breakout. I mean, all of his efficiency metrics are great. He and Lamar led the NFL in terms of passer rating on their connection last year. He was top 10 in fantasy points per route run, tied to Odell Beckham in yards per route run. I mean, he was fantastic last year. He just, wasn't healthy with the foot. And now that he's, back in a normal playing weight, he's got back into shape. I think his ceiling is just so high. I got him at wide receiver 27, which is pretty much about where he should go. I just think he really does have like a top 15, top 12 ceiling. And just because the Ravens are run heavy does not mean that they can't have at least one wide receiver 1.
Yep. And I have 2 follow-up questions. And I see Rhys is anxious so everybody's anti-Hollywood because of his weight. And I could care less. That's like those guys only wanting receivers that weigh more than 220. I'm like, who cares? You know what I'm saying?
Because he'll break down sooner.
Yeah. But I meant, though, a player's a player. Do you think the Ravens run as much 12 as they did last year?
I think they're going to be a little more diverse this year. They actually, so Seth Roberts quietly was like getting 10-ish% of the team's targets last year. He's gone. And I think they're going to be a little more multiple. They've got Devin Duvernay, who is just an absolute jet machine, jet engine out of the slot. I bet he's going to really kind of open up some more things. Mark Andrews is basically a wide receiver. I mean, they split him out as a receiver 50% of the time or so. I think they're going to be really interesting. And typically with quarterbacks, like Lamar is going to regress efficiency-wise this year. There's just no way he can sustain the touchdown rate he had. But I think they're going to have to throw a little bit more just based on game scripts. I mean, they ran really hot last year. I just think there's a little more volume than people are expecting. And I think that they're going to be a little more diverse, which should open up, maybe a couple more slot snaps for Hollywood and definitely get him in some one-on-one situations. I mean, you mentioned his weight. So last year there was an article that came out of Bleacher Report that said he was like playing in like the 160 range or something like that, which is just way below his weight,
right.
playing weight. And now he's back up to 180, which is, where where some pretty good fantasy receivers in years past, even on the smaller side, have been.
Right.
Deshaun Jackson typically plays at 180. Tyreek Hill is a little bit heavier. I think now he's definitely a lot heavier than that. But man, I think Hollywood he's just like primed for a huge breakout if he can stay healthy.
And we don't really know those guys' real weights anyway. I mean, that's why I kind of chuckle, right? Do we really believe that Derrick Henry weighs that amount or more than is listed or whatever? Or
I always found it really funny when Big Ben's weight was like 250, and like all those years he was clearly pushing like 280. But yeah,
that's why he has a beard. That's why he has a beard to cover up a little bit of chinage. What'd you think, Rhys?
Well, on the weight thing, on the Redskins Insider for the '82 Super Bowl, they're saying that Regan's listed weight was somewhere in the 230s, but then they were saying he was like 260, which is bigger than some of the offensive linemen. But also, for Hollywood's favor, a lot of people forget Mark Andrews is a type 1 diabetic, which it makes him severely at risk for COVID. So he could miss some time just to be safe, which would then make Hollywood a top-tier wide receiver. But also, in his Week 1 game, he beat Minkah Fitzpatrick, who we know is a great cover safety, and Xavier Howard, who had 6 interceptions the year before. So he's not bad at all.
Yeah.
He's a good talent.
And he did that on like 15 snaps. I mean, he put up 2 touchdowns over 100 yards and he played like 15 snaps. We just saw like such a couple small sample games. If you go back and watch that Titans game too, like he played every snap and he was uncoverable in that game. I just can't wait to see what he does now that he's got his body right and his weight right. Lamar Jackson was on record saying a couple weeks ago that like his speed is just unreal. I think there's a real chance Hollywood Brown is the next Tyreek Hill. Everybody thinks it might be Henry Ruggs, but I think it's staring us in the face, and I think it's Hollywood.
And to be honest, it could be both, right?
It could be. Could be. Very well.
We want to take square pegs and look for square holes, and sometimes they're a little more round, and it's all cool, right? Because I mean, he could be the first 150-pound star, and it'd be okay, because before Lamar, everybody was saying, no, a guy can't put up this kind of numbers on this low of volume, right? I mean, think about how cheap Lamar was this time last year. I just don't like those pigeonholes. Does that make sense?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, the people that were fading Lamar, it's just like, why? I mean, first of all, we don't have to talk about him as a passer. He obviously proved that he's a great passer last year, but like why he's basically a low end RB1. I mean, I have the stat I tweeted out a couple of days ago that he was averaging over the last couple of years. He's averaged over 10 fantasy points per game just with his legs. I mean, you're basically getting a low end RB2, and then you add in that he's a super efficient passer like we saw last year. It's just lights out. One thing I want to add to the Hollywood debate is like people need to look at T.Y. Hilton too, John Brown. These guys are like 180, like low 180, and they've been not only just great field stretchers, but great fantasy receivers capable of handling like alpha level targets. And I think we'll see that out of Hollywood this year.
Not to mention, he's not that tall. So 180, I'm 6'5". A certain weight on me is different than Rhys, who's 6 foot. You know what I mean? Like it's totally different. And so we can't, and different people are cut different. And that's all I was getting at is, there isn't, this is the way it should be. So I think I remember that tweet. And so we haven't talked about this, but didn't you have like Daniel Jones in the 7 points per game and then Cam was in the 5s or something like that?
Yeah. So it was Josh Allen, who's
Allen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I should have included Daniel Jones in that, but he didn't have enough starts for the data I was looking at. But yeah, Josh Allen has been so underrated as a runner. He and Lamar are really in a tier of their own. So the stat is over the last 3 years, Lamar has averaged basically 11 fantasy points per game with his legs. Josh Allen's at 8.5. And then the next closest guys are Deshaun at 5'8", Cam at 5'7", and then Kyler Murray at 4'9". So Josh Allen's become like one of my favorite mid-round targets this year, just because again, like his ceiling, especially with Stephon Diggs, I don't think has been truly tapped as a passer, and his floor is so high because he's been such an outstanding runner.
I would say I agree with you on the runner. I still question his efficiency in translating it long term. You know what I'm saying? I play so much Dynasty. He's just that guy. It's hard for me to buy in. I will say the interesting part, you mentioned Kyler there, is how Kyler's become the QB4 in Dynasty leagues. And I'm like, I get Hopkins, I get all this, but are you sure? Not that I'm against Kyler. I think Lincoln Riley, I'm not an OU fan, but the furthest thing from an OU fan, but I think Lincoln Riley gets, you disagree with that? No? All right. But I think Lincoln Riley doesn't get enough credit, and all those other quarterbacks get too much. Hurts, Mayfield, and Murray, they get too much credit, and Riley doesn't get enough.
Yeah. Do you prefer Dak to Kyler in Dynasty? Because that's where I'm at.
Yes.
Yeah.
But better offense, better everything. Plus, they're not that far off in age, and
they're
he's proven it.
Yeah, they're also not far off in terms of their rushing. Like Dak is always sneaky, going to add a couple points per game with his legs.
Yep. And having CeeDee Lamb as your receiver 3 is not exactly.
That's not even fair. With that offensive line having CeeDee, they can run CeeDee Lamb out of the slot, Cooper out of the slot. It's just, man, I'm all in on Dallas. Like they are gonna shred this year.
I like Jarwin. I like Jarwin. So my go-to in leagues is take and we're talking about Scott's, take 2 of the Jarwin, Herndon tier, because somebody's going to do okay. I don't like so once you have the top 2 guys, right? I think Andrews is overvalued when I see him in the second, third round, him and Ertz. I don't like Ingram, Henry, and those other guys. I'd much rather have Jarwin at his price than Hunter Henry at his, or Waller with Witten there, with the rookie receivers and Witten there. I'm not really big on Waller. Anyway, what are you thinking, Rhys?
I do like your tight end call with going Jarwin, especially if you're an OU fan. But
he's an Oklahoma State guy.
Yeah. But on the Cowboys, you have to think they've already said that Tony Pollard's going to run some out of the slot. So who's going to be kicked off the field for that?
It's going to be Lamb. It's going to be Lamb, because Gallup was way underrated last year. This is my soapbox, Graham. I apologize if you're there too. But I think Gallup was way underrated last year, especially considering he goes, 6th, 7th round in drafts?
Yeah, I mean, he is maybe the quietest receiver ever to finish 6th in the league in receiving yards per game. And just no one cares. It's like no one cares. It's crazy. I've been trying to buy Gallup in Dynasty. I think he's actually fairly priced in redraft, just because there's going to be some games where it's going to be a Cooper game or a Lamb game or a Zeke game, whatever. I think that's going to be a little hard to predict from that perspective. But like Dynasty, I think Gallup is by far the cheapest. And to your point on Jarwin, he's somebody that I have been really trying to draft in best ball, because last year Jason Witten was sitting on the sofa and, trying to call games. He's 37 years old, comes back, finishes as the tight end 12, gets 80 targets. Like, what's going to happen when those targets are filled by an actually good player? And no offense to Jason Witten. I mean, he's been a good player his whole career, but his time is over. I'm really excited to see what Jarwin does too. I'm just excited to see what this Dallas offense does, because they have so many good players.
Yep.
Well, the final game of 2018, people forgot Jarwin torched the Giants for like 2 touchdowns. And so that's when you saw his potential at first, and then he kept on kind of flashing a little bit.
Plus, that NFC East is pretty weak.
On defense, at least.
But I'm not even buying the Eagles that great. I mean, I don't know. We all probably would agree the Washington football team, or whatever we want to call them, besides bad, is going to be bad. The Giants aren't, they're going to struggle. Yeah.
You can't just have 350-pounders.
Hey, the other thing I want to know about Cowboys, and I think it's a positive, but what's your take on McCarthy replacing Garrett?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. So there was a quote that came out. Kellen Moore was their offensive coordinator last year, and he called. I don't know what happened with Dallas, but he called the first couple of games. They ran a bunch of play action. The offense was humming along. Then Jason Garrett, put an end to that. what he said is they're basically going to keep all the same terminology, and he's coming in and learning from Kellen Moore, which I think is awesome. Like, I think Kellen Moore showed just in a very small sample that he kind of gets it. I think it's also a good thing that McCarthy's not coming in and just trying to run what he thinks is best. He's learning from Dak. He's learning from Kellen Moore. So I'm excited to see how they kind of blend all these ideas together. If you remember back in the day, those Packers teams were like all 3 wide receiver heavy. So I'm fully expecting them to run 11 like 80% of the time. They've got to get Cooper, Gallup, and Lamb on the field all at the same time. And I really hope that they my only concern is Dallas goes a little bit too run heavy with Zeke, but I think they're going to open it up with Dak. I think they're really going to try and open it up and run a bunch of play action, and this offense is going to hum.
I will say in deeper leagues, Andy Dalton's a great stash because you can't tell me if you did projections week to week, if he's starting, he's a top 12 quarterback, right?
I mean, if you play in like Superflex Dynasty, or if you play in any 2 QB league that's deep, like 18 plus roster spots, like Dalton's he's a free square just to add as a stash, because you're right. If anything were to happen to Dak, he would immediately be a top, I don't even know, top 12, probably top 8 with this offense.
Right. And the same reason in those leagues, I'm going after Jameis. If Teddy can do it, Jameis can do it. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. I like Teddy, but I'm just like, I'd much rather have him than nothing against Minshew, because Rebar's coming on in a few weeks. That's his boy. But, I'd rather have the starter in Dallas, whoever it is, than the starter in Jacksonville, whoever that is. What other questions you got for Mr. Graham?
Why are you so this stock? I noticed how you have Tyler Lockett pretty well. You like him a lot, along with a lot of other efficiency analysts. Why do you
Harmon?
Think,
like Harmon.
Why is all of them? Why do all of you guys like him so much?
Why is the love fest for Lockett, huh?
I mean, I just want players that are good at football, man. Like Tyler Lockett's always been good at football. If you like, so I did a little study for our player profiles up on fantasypoints.com and looked at the games where Tyler Lockett was healthy last year. So if we remember, like week 12, week 13, he had that weird like shin contusion where he was just never right. I took those games out of the sample and just looked at the games where Tyler Lockett wasn't on the injury report. And he was the wide receiver 8 in fantasy points per game. He out-targeted DK Metcalf, obviously scored more fantasy points than him. Him and Russell Wilson just have this connection that I just think is one of those things that, like, it's really hard to put data on and kind of grasp from an analytical standpoint. But if you look into some of the deeper numbers, like Next Gen Stats has this really cool stat about completion rate above expectation that, like, looks into, just how difficult throws were based on like where they're out on the field, how deep the ball is thrown, whether there's pressure. And Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson have just crushed in this stat in back-to-back years. They were number 1 in completion rate over expectation in 2018, and they were 3rd last year among all quarterback and wide receiver duos. So I mean, he's their number 1. And I know DK Metcalf has his truthers, and he's a great player. But Tyler Lockett has been the number 1 in Seattle for back-to-back years. And I think DK is a fantastic player, but I think he's more of a field stretcher and a little bit more of like a secondary 1B type option, whereas they move Tyler Lockett all over the field, and him and Russ just have this unspoken bond between each other. And I think it's going to continue this year and, into the next couple of years, because Lockett's only 28 years old. I mean, he still has at least 2 to 3 years left in his prime.
And, they have similar price tags, which is interesting. And Lockett's another guy that probably doesn't weigh too much over 180 soaking weight.
Exactly. Yeah.
And,
I bet Lockett's way, way lighter than that. He looks lighter than that.
Yeah. People don't realize. And he was just because I grew up in Tulsa, he's a Tulsa guy and wasn't very well recruited, went to K-State, Yep. K-State and receivers, Jordy and Lockett. I mean, they had some decent guys come through, but Lockett's always been underappreciated. I mean, his whole career, nobody, what's his ADP, like receiver 18 or something,
Lower than that. He's going in the 6th round.
He goes 5th, 6th round. I mean, I've seen plenty of leagues where DK goes ahead of him, which I mean, I kind of get you're projecting for upside, but I mean, you also have to look into like targets and stuff. And I know Metcalf's definitely going to improve, and they're definitely going to expand his route tree. But Lockett he's just really good, and he's always commanded targets, not only from Russell, but he had a huge target share in college. Like he's always been an alpha receiver. And I guess this kind of goes to the Hollywood point too, is like, just because you're small doesn't mean you can't command, big target shares.
Yeah, it's kind of like, since you were at NFL Network, MJD was short, but he was never small. You know what I mean? Like, dude was 5'6", 210. Everybody was like, well, he's too small. No. He's short, but he's 210 at 5'6".
One of my favorite.
Go ahead.
No, one of my favorite. I was just going to say one of my favorite MJD plays was the blitz pickup he had on Sean Merriman.
Oh yeah,
back when Merriman was like the league's premier pass rusher, just blew him up. And Merriman has 7 or 8 inches and probably 50 or 60 pounds on him. He was the man.
Yeah, and MJD had the huge legs. You have another question for him before I go a different direction?
So on the previous podcast, Dwayne McFarland, I'm going to bring him up here, that we both like, is J.K. Dobbins, the rookie running back from Ohio State, now in Baltimore.
You like him?
Yes.
Graham, Rhys dug through your Twitter profile and found that this nugget that you like Dobbins.
Thinks he's the most unappreciated back, right?
Yeah, man, especially in Dynasty. So in redraft, I think it's going to be pretty hard for both Dobbins and Ingram to beat their ADPs. Ingram's still really good. He was fantastic last year. Going to have some touchdown regression for sure. Dobbins, unless Ingram gets hurt or misses time or whatever, it's going to be hard for him to blow past his ADP. But for Dynasty, I mean, my God, Mark Ingram's probably not going to be on the team next year. And Dobbins has just landed in the perfect opportunity for a back of his skill set. He's a one-cut runner who makes just excellent decisions at the second level. Came from an RPO scheme, run pass option scheme at Ohio State, and that's basically the entirety of the Baltimore offense. That's what they predicate their run game on, is RPOs. I just think Dobbins just landed in the perfect spot. He's going to get downhill. He's going to be violent. And he's going to face a lot of one-on-one situations at the second level that he's going to have a huge advantage on. Only 21 years old. Ingram's 30. I've been trying and failing most of my dynasty leagues to get Dobbins, but in the few spots I have been able to get him. I just think you're getting a locked-in RB1 for at least, the 2021, 2022, and 2023 seasons at prices that are nowhere close to RB1 ceiling. So, yeah, I'm really excited for Dobbins long term.
All right, so 2 things. First of all, this time last year, I trade in a Devy league that has Devy players. I traded Marlon Mack for him straight up.
Wow.
You like it or hate it?
Well done. That's a huge,
somebody in the industry, so I'm not gonna.
Especially with Jonathan Taylor, you look like a
I
genius
lose enough trades that on the one I don't ever lord it over someone, because that's no good.
Yeah.
All right, but Rhys has done some research on Dobbins and the Ravens. So do you think the pie is big enough, Rhys, for them both being Ingram and Dobbins to get enough carries, enough touches?
It's huge.
How big is the pie?
It's nearly 600 rush attempts.
Is that including Lamar?
That includes Lamar, but if you take out Lamar's, it's 420, which is still huge. It'd still be pretty much top 10 in the league.
For 2 of them, right?
Yeah, right. Because everybody's talking about how Gus Edwards might cut in, but I don't think it was going to cut in too much if you're going to spend a second-round pick on the dude.
Yeah.
But there's over 1,000 yards not accounted for by Lamar or Ingram.
1,000 rushing yards that from last year that were not Ingram or Lamar.
Right. And also they had about middle of the pack touchdown rushing percentage. So that could go higher depending on how everybody's talking about how Lamar's going to regress negatively. But if he's going to regress negatively, that means something's going to go up. So I think it could be their rushing touchdown or yards or attempts.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest question, Rhys, is whether or not they give Gus Edwards 100 carries again. Because if they do, you're probably right. You're looking at Ingram at like 190-ish carries and then Dobbins at like 110. And for fantasy, that's just not enough. But
Right.
I'm kind of with you that you don't spend the second round pick on a running back, even though it was kind of a luxury pick for Baltimore. You don't spend that pick without having a plan in place. And it would make sense that they don't give Edwards, the same role he had last year.
The one role that I personally question is the Justice Hill role. Who's going to be the receiving back? Dobbins was a decent receiver at Ohio State. So, I mean, there is a chance.
But the receiving back for the Ravens didn't get much targets. He only had like 12% target share.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's because Lamar, every time they're trying to, Lamar is looking for his first read to second read. If it's not there, he's looking to scramble.
Yeah.
He's not trying to check it down very much. But Dobbins was definitely a very good receiver coming out of Ohio State. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that they target him a little bit more in the passing game. But yeah, we'll just have to see.
All right, we're going to tidy this up. So you read Rhys's book.
Yes.
And let's talk analytics just as we try to tidy things up. What are some of the tips, tricks, thought process even? Everybody wants to distill it down. Give me a tip. And in no way do I want to reduce you to that. But is there any thought processes you would want to pass on to Rhys or somebody else that's listening to say, hey, why don't you look at the world through this lens because it's an uncommon lens, and give sticky analytics? Any
yeah.
thought?
So in Rhys's book, he talked the most, the first thing, I think the opening chapter was all about targets and opportunity. And that's I can't hammer this home enough. Opportunity is the number one, number two, and number three thing you should be looking at for fantasy, especially at running back. Efficiency almost doesn't even matter. There's a couple efficiency stats like yards per route run for receivers and tight ends that matter. It matters a little bit for running backs, but I went and studied this summer. So the number one and number two things that correlate most to fantasy points are snaps and routes run. If you look further down the totem pole, they're 4 to 5 times more influential on fantasy points than efficiency. Yards per carry, yards after contact, fantasy points per touch. If I can give you any piece of advice, it's pretty much fade efficiency at all costs, except for at the tails. Meaning, there's some players like Alvin Kamara and Derrick Henry that are very efficient, and that efficiency sticks year to year. And then there's players at the lower end of the totem pole like Kalen Ballage, who are just not good at football and very inefficient, and that sticks year to year. But by and large, 80% of the NFL kind of switches year to year between being hyper efficient, or, super efficient, moderately efficient, and inefficient. And I think too many people get caught up in efficiency traps and really just don't know how to correctly assess regression. And one of the biggest and easiest ways to get caught up is being trapped by players that you think are super efficient but actually aren't.
Well, especially because I've seen a lot of players where they just decline it year over year, and take a guy like Zeke, right? Zeke's had more than enough touches that would make somebody worry about his durability, but he gets such high volume that he's a gimme at his dry spot. You have to play that, right? Just because of volume and that offensive line. Am I wrong there? I mean, if I told you he's going to get 3.75 yards per carry, you'd be like, no big deal, because I know he's going to get volume.
Yeah, I don't care. I mean, as long as Zeke gets 3.8 yards per carry, as long as he's getting those 320 touches and 70-ish targets and all the red zone work, we really don't care, because the volume is what's bringing us to the table.
Exactly. The other guy, when you mentioned efficiency, I also think of it, the only time I really like the word efficiency is if we're looking for guys at the bottom that we're saying, hey, he was efficient in a small sample size. I point to Will Dissly, right? Will Dissly has the smallest sample size of anybody, but he's shown okay when he's been healthy, when all that stuff. But you could use efficiency to try to point out that maybe he's a better value than Greg Olsen. That seems reasonable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Yeah, Jarwin is another guy who has been efficient on a small sample. Like I think over the last 2 years, he's top 15 in yards per route run. And like I said, that's one of the only efficiency metrics that actually matters. So I think it can be a little bit trappy, but with guys like Disley and Jarwin, you have to kind of balance it with like their actual production. And with Disley in particular, every time he's gotten snaps, he's produced.
Yeah. I was just saying that sometimes efficiency can help pull out guys who normally we would discount, right? And so, anyway, do you have any closing questions for Graham coming off the top rope on him?
I don't come off the top rope at all.
Elbow.
Except to me.
Atomic elbow.
Except on me. Do you have any other questions?
How'd you get started in the fantasy business? Because you mentioned you've been doing this full time for 7 years, and you're a very young guy. So how'd you get started?
He has no gray in that beard. If you notice,
it's just bushy. It needs to be trimmed, honestly. Yeah, I got started my sophomore year of college. I just always played fantasy with either friends or my dad. Back in 6th, 7th grade, just got started. Always loved it. Always read, the newspaper box scores and just followed stats religiously. My first love was baseball, and baseball is obviously a very data-driven sport. But in my sophomore year of college, I just kind of on a whim joined Twitter, started writing some really, really bad fantasy analysis on a blog, but got lucky and got a little bit better through a couple years of blogging. Got picked up by JJ Zacharias and Number Fire, and he was pretty influential on my career in terms of like just helping me understand data better, but also making me a better writer and more concise. Worked for Number Fire for a number of years. Evan Silva and I kind of became close, and he was a huge mentor for me. Eventually hired me at Roto World. So it kind of, for me, I kind of felt like I timed things really well. Like I didn't mean to time things well. Like I kind of got in right as fantasy Twitter was really starting to get popular. So I got lucky from a timing standpoint, but really it's just been a long time of just trying to get better and make incremental gains every single year. And I've been really fortunate.
Incremental gains is the secret to life. Nobody tells you that.
Yeah.
But you don't become great. You become better, and then the next day better. It's kind of like when they asked Warren Buffett, he was like, hey, as soon as I figured out compound interest, I wanted to make,
it's a game changer.
And that's incremental gains, right? And so the other thing I always tell Rhys is the more you write, the better you'll write. And 100%. The more you study and research, the better you'll do it. Because, it's one of those things that you have to read a lot and write a lot to get better. You agree with that, Graham?
Absolutely. And Rhys, if you, I would encourage you, I don't know what you're interested in books wise and stuff, but like, I'm sure you're reading a lot of sports columns, but really try to also read anything that is not sports related at all, anything that you're interested in, because that'll make you a better writer. I read a lot of philosophy books in college and investment books. I'm a finance major by heart.
Me too.
I'm an accountant by heart, actually, but super boring. But I think any type of reading that just expands your knowledge base and writing base, it'll make you a better writer.
Even thoughts like economics come into fantasy.
Absolutely.
Accounting, and Rhys reads a lot of fiction. He likes the Harry Potters. He likes all that kind of stuff, right?
I'm actually reading the Harry Potters right now. I read them in middle school. I'm in the middle of Goblet of Fire right now, just because there's nothing else going on. But anything that just jogs the mind, I think is great. Reading is one of those things that I think it's like working out, like it'll never be a bad decision to read. It'll never be a bad decision to work out. Anything that gets your body active or mind active, it'll never be a bad choice.
Yeah, and Aristotle had this quote, it's the mark of an educated mind to consider a thought but not accept it. And I think that's our thought in the fantasy world is we get peppered with all these people who think that they have the right answer on everything. And we have to be able to consider it, weigh it, give it how much credibility and move on. In a previous podcast, I think it was with Dwayne McFarland, I was, one of the only thing that ever gets me on the fantasy community is everybody argues over, all right, we're all dealing with probabilities, right? and everybody's like has strong opinions about whether their 73% chance is better than somebody else's 43% or whatever, you know. And I think we're all happiest when we go, hey, we're just playing the odds. We want to increase them the best we can. How can we skew this to our favor by the stickiness of stats and things like that? But none of us have all the answers. All the guys like Hollywood Brown could have a toenail injury and miss 3 games, and now he's, you know, he doesn't do us any good, or something like COVID happens or whatever. You know what I'm saying? This is a fun time. And I think the people that do the best in the fantasy world, I'll speak like Rich Rebar, are the ones that have the best attitudes about it. You know, he's like, hey, I'm a stat guy, but I'm just trying to improve my chances, however be.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, that's the exact way I view it too. Is like, you know, I think on Twitter specifically, the way the platform works at this point, it's all about, you know, getting engagement, and a lot of that is hot takes.
Yeah.
I try to stay as far away from that as possible and just really give takes when I believe them. And, you know, I think in fantasy we just don't do a good enough job, and maybe I'm sure I don't do a good enough job of thinking this too, is like, we should be thinking range of outcomes and
right.
and probabilities. And I think just so many times people get caught up in, you know, thinking they have either, like you said, all the answers, or just trying to create a name for themselves and act like they have some sort of crystal ball, when in reality, like, especially this year, we just have no idea what's going to happen.
Yep. Everything's on a spectrum, right? And like this, he hears me preach this at home all the time. Somebody goes, hey, did you have a good day? And we're always like, thumb up, thumb down. Where in reality, everything was on a spectrum, you know? And because we have such a Yelp or TripAdvisor take on everything, it's either thumbs up or thumbs down. There's no, hey, I like this person, okay, but he's not worth the price, or you know, in the fantasy world or whatever.
Yeah, that's the way I view players. It's like I'll always say, like, I like the player but hate the price, and that's really what it is. It's not just black and white. And a lot of analysis now, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. I mean, a lot of analysis is black and white, hot take or cold take. That's it.
Yeah. Life's too short, man. I like to smile. I like to laugh. And that's the other reason I really don't engage as much on Twitter as I used to, is because a lot of people are like, hey, that sucks. And I'm like, all right, you know, I'm thankful not to do it for a living like you guys and have to take that kind of abuse. Maybe that'll be Rhys's, you know, future.
Rhys, if you could come up with a platform that makes it a little less of a cesspool and a little less more devolving conversation for fantasy analysts and just fantasy thoughts, that would be fantastic.
Oh yeah, but everybody wants to, and he mentions hot takes. It's because everybody wants to have that one sleeper, you know, like, I knew Miles Boykin was going to be the guy. You know what I mean? Like, anyway, Graham, thank you for having us. Thank you for coming on. Rhys enjoyed himself, and hopefully you'll join us again sometime in the future, because we enjoyed just expanding our thought process, have a casual conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys. This was great.
Thank you.
Bye.